Hello, everyone. Good morning. Sorry for the delay. We had some technical difficulties, but thank you for being here today. Welcome to our webinar to present the EM&V report for MCE's Low-Income Families and Tenants, or LIFT pilot program. We're going to get it started since we had a little bit of a delay. And I will go over first. My name is Grace Peralta. I am the program manager for the LIFT program. And next slide, please. We will go over first our agenda for the day. First, I will be doing a program overview of how LIFT got started and the basics of the program. And then I will pass it over to DMV to go over the evaluation objectives and approach and the results of the program in terms of the program delivery, performance, participant and contractor experience. And then they will go over some conclusions and recommendations for the program. And at the end, we will also have some time for Q&A and for you all to ask any questions. Next slide, please. Okay, so the LIFT program in November of 2016, the California Public Utilities Commission, through the decision 1611-022, approved MC's LIFT pilot program under the Investor-Owned Utilities Energy Savings Assistance, or ESA, and the California Alternative Rates for Energy Care Programs and Budget Applications. So, which this means is that the LIFT program will follow all of the regulatory framework of the ESA programs also. The program aimed to reduce the energy burden and improve the quality of life of residents in income-qualified multifamily properties in MC service territory through energy efficiency, electrification, and health and safety and comfort upgrades also. Was something that we experienced through running our multifamily energy savings program, which had a lot of participants in affordable housing, was that the residents of income-qualified multifamily housing face multiple barriers to participating in energy efficiency programs, including fear of property owner retaliation, lack of control over any significant upgrades made to their units, as renters, there's only so much that they can do at their units, and also concerns about sharing any personal information. Back then in 2017 or 2016, when we started the program too, the political climate was very different. And so there was a lot of hesitation of sharing personal information, or there was fear of immigration enforcement actions and anything that had to do with, folks coming into people's homes. And then finally, after the program was approved, the CPUC granted us MCE $3.5 million over 2 years to deliver the LIFT pilot program. And the pilot launched on October 31st of 2017. And later on in October 2019, the LIFT program was granted an initial timeline extension, which ended on May 31st of this year. Next slide, please. And then to go over some of the core benefits and incentives that we offer through the LIFT program. First of all, we offer $1,200 per qualifying unit for in-unit energy efficiency upgrades for a variety of measures. And in addition to that, a separate budget allowed units to receive additional incentives for water heating and HVAC heat pumps. And these could go all the way from $500 to $5,000, depending on the systems that we were switching from and to, which meant an introduction of electrification measures to income eligible programs. This was something that was very new at the time. And one of the goals that we had was to shorten that gap in between income eligible folks being able to access to electrification measures, something that was so new and so expensive back then and it is now, and to also gather information and be able to report back to the industry what the impacts of these upgrades were. And then also a small subset or a small pilot we had within our pilot was fuel switching. So there's a good amount of properties in our service area that have propane systems. And so the CPUC allow us to do propane to electric switches that didn't go over 10% of our total heat pump installation. Next slide, please. And then a quick summary of the period evaluated under this report. Between 2017 and 2020, the program expenses were a bit over $1 million. The estimated kWh savings was 0.94, with 7,818 estimated kWh savings, 669 therm savings, and a total of 682 treated households. Next slide, please. With that, well, also to, as I mentioned earlier, MC worked with DMV to conduct the evaluation of the LIFT pilot program. This report provides the results of DMV's evaluation of MC's low-income families and tenants pilot program from 2017 to 2020. With that, next slide, and I will pass it over to the DMV team.
Super. Can folks hear me?
Yes.
Super. Just wanted to make sure we hadn't had any technical difficulties intervene. Good morning, everyone. This is Gomati Sadashivan. This is the culmination of a 3-year engagement that kicked off in February with the NCD team on this innovative pilot program. We're happy to be here to present the results from this evaluation to this group today. I'm told I'm sounding muffled. Yeah, please let me know if this is better. Next slide, please. The DMV evaluation team comprised of our colleagues, Amber and Cam, who are here today. They were the M&V and process lead. I'm the project manager, Gomati Sadashivan, and our project sponsor was Jared McGuire. So we bring the strengths and the combination of engineering and research expertise that was required to evaluate this pilot project. Next slide. We'll go over the evaluation objectives and the approach, and then as Grace summarized on an agenda up front, we will, hold on, let me try. I'm getting feedback that I can't be heard. How about now? Is this better?
Does seem a bit the same, Dorothy. Keep talking though.
All right, all right. And Grace,
That's better.
Saw a message fly in from Jennifer that 8 people were on the Google Meet meeting. So you might want to redirect them here to our Zoom call.
Thank you, will do.
All right, sure. Okay, if we could move on to the next slide. Our evaluation objectives were to estimate the impacts of these upgrades, both site and source, the energy impacts, the resultant emissions reduction, the energy bill impacts of switching, the costs incurred, and then also to understand the barriers and motivators of program participation, and for those who did participate in the program, what their level of satisfaction was, how easy it was to really participate in this program, and to measure non-energy impacts of the occupants from these upgrades. Next slide, please. And we adopted this evaluation approach to we adopted this evaluation approach to address these research objectives, and we've organized these through the sort of program life cycle, right from program delivery to program performance to participant experience. So in order to understand how the program performed with respect to delivery, we conducted program staff interviews, we conducted program implementer interviews, that was with the AEA team, And then contractor interviews, those who participated and delivered, like the installation contractors, and also those who underwent training through NCE's program. In order to assess program performance, we undertook on-site data collection, equipment data logging, and also conducted a billing analysis, utility meter data analysis. And to assess the participant experience, we analyzed, so there were other firms that actually conducted the occupant surveys, but DMV analyzed the data from the pre-post occupant surveys, and also conducted interviews with property managers to understand what their experience on the program was like. Let's move on to the next slide. So since this was a pilot, there were key performance metrics laid out by NCE to measure progress through this pilot period along each of these dimensions. And the specific metrics aimed at assessing whether the program was reaching the intended audience. You know, how many households where the primary language spoken was not English were reached by the program. How many of these households could be characterized as extended family households, where it wasn't just a nuclear family, but perhaps you had multiple generations or two siblings, families living together. How many of these households were outside of Cal Enviroscreen defined blighted areas or disadvantaged areas? And the aim of this metric was to assess whether the program was serving the naturally occurring affordable housing customer segment. How many of these units were receiving comprehensive upgrades, the percent of households that were installing energy efficiency measures as well through the LIFT program, and then to understand the costs incurred to procure and install heat pumps. These were the delivery-focused measures. And then the performance-focused measures had to do with savings, bill impact, how these translate to GHG emissions, and then the BTU savings impact of heat pump installation. And then finally, the participant experience. You know, how was this for all of the folks who participated or were involved in delivering this program? The property owner or manager, the tenant, the non-energy impacts, and we also spoke to contractors, as we said. So let's get into the results for program delivery. If we could go to slide 14. The very first, so there's a lot of work on this, but the way we've laid it out is how we define this, what the source of this data. Yeah,
Gomati, sorry to interrupt. It's just the sound is still really muffled. I wonder if you bring your headset to the front, maybe.
How about now?
That's much better. Yes.
Okay. I'm literally holding the. I don't know if I'm on camera. It looks a little bit ridiculous, but let's go with it.
No, it's okay. And please, folks, let us know if that's better. Thank you.
All right. And yeah, so until now, it was all the preamble. We talked about our approach and the specific metrics, and now we're getting into the results specific to program delivery. We're on slide 14. We measured the number of the proportion of non-English speaking households served by the LIFT program. And the way we've laid it out here is, how do you define it? Where did we get the statistic from? And did the program meet its goal? And this metric is computed based on responses to the pre-post occupant survey. Altogether, we spoke to folks in 128 households, and 54 out of those 128 households were non-English or limited English speaking households. So that translates to a percentage of 42. The program goal was to ensure that at least 40% satisfy any one of what is characterized as a hidden community. And these hidden communities are either defined as those that are limited or non-English speaking that live outside of Cal Enviro Stream 2.0, or that are in extended family household setups. So just with this one definition, one metric, the LIFT program ended up surpassing its goal of serving 40% who meet at least one of the three criteria. So let's move on to the next slide, slide 15, where we looked at how many of the households served by the LIFT program fell under the extended family definition. So an extended family refers to the living arrangement where it's beyond the nuclear family. As I mentioned earlier, it could be multiple generations or siblings. And what we found, and there's other research which we've covered in the full report as well, this tends to be an intersectional hidden community characteristic. Several of these households, perhaps they are new immigrants, come from elsewhere, the primary language is different. In the case of this study, 2 out of the 128 individuals stated that they were in extended family households. So that's around 1.6%. Again, this is sourced from the survey. And the program surpassed its goal because in combination, it was the union of these three characteristics, Cal Enviro Screen, extended family, and primary language not being English or limited English. So the program surpassed its goal of reaching 40% of the program participants who fulfill at least one of these three criteria. So let's move on to the next slide, which is the last one about reaching hidden communities. The program had a goal of, again, reaching 40%, and then the households outside Cal Enviro Screen. So it wasn't those who were living in those environmentally blighted areas or disadvantaged areas, but living outside, so low-income communities, tenants who were in naturally occurring affordable housing. And 94% of those that were treated by the program are outside of Cal Enviro Screen compliance. So the program again surpassed its goal of qualified dwelling units that met this program eligibility criteria. So let's move on to the next slide, which pertains to the metric on households receiving comprehensive upgrades. And this is defined as those that receive upgrades from both the MFES, Multifamily Energy Savings, and the LIFT program. And per program tracking data that we received from the implementation contractor AEA, 387 out of 510, so that translates to 76%, received upgrades from both programs and multiple measures. So the program surpassed its goal, which was to serve 60% of the dwelling units that received upgrades from both. So let's move on to the slide number 18, the metric pertaining to households that install other energy efficiency measures through the LIFT program. And this pertained to the eligibility, the income eligibility of households that were in NCE's territory. Altogether, there were 56,087 income eligible households in NCE's territory. And the program's goal was to serve 1,482 of these. At the time that we prepared this final report, the program had treated 842 income eligibility households. So the program did not meet its goal to serve the number that it desired. And it achieved 56% of its stated goal. So let's move on to the next slide. There wasn't a goal set in terms of costs, but one of the things that the program wished to track was procurement, and the pilot aimed to track was procurement and installation costs per dwelling served. And we, D&V, conducted an analysis of contractor invoices that the program had acquired. And these are the costs that were estimated for the various equipment, for the central heat pump water heater, the in-unit heat pump water heater, and the ductless heat pump, what you see here on the slide. And the program incentives cover, depending on the equipment, between 30 and 90% of installation costs. And some costs are shared across projects with multiple measures. And we'll come to this a little bit later in our recommendation. By nature, you will find that not all invoices are broken down similarly. Contractors might end up sort of varying or bundling costs in a way that it's not easy to compare or even tease out these numbers. So, we just, when we cover the recommendations, we can go over it, but, there were some recommendations related to requiring or prescribing more granular information to the extent possible. So yeah, that sums up the program delivery related metrics. And so I'll pass it on to my colleague Cam Tuttle, who will cover results related to how the program actually performed. So yeah, over to you, Cam.
All right, thank you, Gomati. I think we can advance one slide, please. Or perhaps two. Excellent. Okay, I'm going to start off here, kind of laying the foundation for the program's heat pump projects, and we'll talk about the population of projects that received heat pump benefits, and talk about the analysis scope in terms of the sample that we have. So the table on the slide provides some characteristics of the 12 projects that the program booked. So sort of left to right, we've got the rebate approval date. So it kind of gives you a sense of the project timeline within the program. The program year is the PY header there. EM&V scope indicates whether the project was eligible or it was eligible and analyzed, or if the timeline for the project did not allow it to be included. And then we have a sample ID as well as a project ID. The project ID was tracked by MCE. The sample ID is used by the M&V team. So I'll point out if it has a letter and a number, like B1 and B2, we see those are like adjacent. Those are basically the same property, but different projects. So in that case, it was like a phased project. So there's multiple, but they're really adjacent to one another and share similar like building characteristics. And then the location, so this is the city within MCE's territory, the project scope. So the type of heat pump, whether it's HVAC or domestic hot water, or if it's, I think we see they're all ductless here. We didn't have any ducted systems. So really it's, I think we see ductless HVAC or central water heating, or both sometimes, and whether it's fuel substitution. So going from one CPUC regulated fuel, natural gas, to electric fuel is the substitution. Fuel switching, in this case, they were all propane. So like on-site stored tank propane, switching to electric fuel from the heat pumps. Is my audio all right? I'm seeing a note in the chat. Oh, that's from Go With You. Okay. Hopefully I'm doing all right.
Yeah, your audio is good, Cameron.
Okay, great. Net meter duration during the analysis period. So some of the sample here you can see already had net metering, AKA photovoltaic electric on-site generation. The 3 fuel switching projects in the population added solar PV during the analysis period. So that's important. I'll bring that up again, but just to note that. And then there's the number of analyzed units as well as the number of total dwelling units at the sites. So 12 projects overall, 4 of which were not eligible because of the period that they were executed did not permit enough time for us to complete the post-retrofit analysis to be able to have annualized results. So of that, we analyzed 5 different projects. 2 were report eligible, 3 were report eligible, but not directly analyzed. 2 of those were adjacent, B2 and F2. Which is all to say, really, the projects that were available in time for this report were mostly analyzed or were adjacent to a project was analyzed. Really, the only one that wasn't was that top line sample site ID alpha or project ID 6. It was a single dwelling unit, and all the other report eligible projects were analyzed or were adjacent to and shared many characteristics. So bottom line, we feel we have a very representative sample in terms of the sample relative to the program's population. Okay, I think we can move to the next slide, get into some results. So I'm going to present first. This is the site energy savings per dwelling unit. So looking at the table, we got the number of lift units. This is the dwelling units. And then we have electric kilowatt hour savings. We have demand savings estimates, and then gas energy savings. This is all per dwelling unit. So the top row there, not including the header, this is the estimate from energy efficiency. So not the heat pump measures, but everything else, lighting, hot water reduction measures, insulation, those types of things that the program was offering. This comes straight from the program tracking data that we received. So 86 kilowatt hour per dwelling unit savings from the energy efficiency, 0.006 kilowatt hours per dwelling unit from the energy efficiency, and then 5 therms per dwelling unit. Okay, so let's look at the next 2 rows. So heat pump substitution, 276 dwelling units benefited from heat pump substitution sponsored by the program. So we can see the negative 150 kilowatt hours. So annually, each dwelling unit on average experienced an increase of 150 kilowatt hour consumption, right? We're going from a natural gas fuel to a electric fuel. So we're adding electric loads. So we see an increase there. That's not unexpected in the fuel substitution measure. We don't have any electric demand estimates on fuel substitution, and as a policy, no demand impacts are recognized from fuel substitution. But we do have a substantial gas therm energy savings per unit from the heat pump fuel substitution at 72 therms annually per dwelling unit. Okay, so we'll look at the heat pump fuel switching. So again, this is going from propane to electric fuel for the heating or HVAC heating or water heating, space heating or water heating. So we had 19 dwelling units that benefited from heat pump fuel switching. Many fewer. As Grace said, there was a total limit, I think, of 10% of the overall program activity. So we'll highlight the 1,130 kilowatt hour savings per unit. That really should be looked at as a fuel substitution and adding on-site PV, because we had no projects and therefore no sample points that did not also conduct or add solar PV when they conducted the fuel switch. So that's an important, did any already have AC? Any of the switch, I don't believe any of the sites with switching had AC. Many, I know a considerable number of fuel substitution sites had, say, older like window AC units. And, you know, like a small furnace or a gravity well furnace or something like that. Okay, but we do see also a significant reduction in gas energy therm. So we took the propane energy and converted that into therm units. So a significant reduction in the fuel, the gas fuel, or the propane in that instance from fuel switching. So overall for the program, including energy efficiency, fuel substitution, and fuel switching, we see 865 units benefited, and the average or the typical annual kilowatt hour savings came in at 50 kilowatt hours. And the electric demand from really just the EE was 0.005 kilowatts, and then averaging to 32 therms per dwelling unit. So you can see it's weighted much closer to, say, the fuel substitution and energy efficiency than it is the fuel switching, because there's just so few of those in comparison. So this is all to say that LIFT did exceed its target for ESA gas savings, but not for electric savings because of the adding of electric load, but overall exceeding ESA targets on energy overall combined. And one note that LIFT didn't offer or didn't install all the ESA weatherization measures. So that's just to say that ESA had some other measures that might have resulted in electric savings that LIFT does not have or didn't offer. Okay, I think we can go to the next. So now we're talking about bill savings. So cost savings to the owners of the end users here. So again, we're just looking at the heat pumps, not the energy efficiency measures. And let me orient you to the rate cases. So the rate cases were the actual rates that the sample participants were billed at, and the alternative. Well, let me back up. So in a couple of instances, the participants changed their electric rates. All the changes were still from a time of use to a time of use, but I think some went from, say, like A to C during the retrofit. The alternative that we ran is if they had not made the change of time of use during the retrofit. So you can actually see there was a slight financial benefit in the fuel substitution. Nobody in fuel switching changed their rates. So it was beneficial a little bit for the participants to conduct the rate change when they did. But that being said, we'll talk fuel substitution. So average per dwelling unit annual bill savings of $128. That's for fuel substitution. For the switching, again, I would highlight that this really is adding PV and conducting the fuel switching. So that's really what that $1,100 impact should tell you. So overall, the 295 units, the actual bill savings annual per dwelling unit, $192. If you're looking at the alternative rates, pretty similar at 187. Overall, 295 units. That means the program resulted in 56,000 and change total savings for the participants annual. Okay, I think we can press on. So we're talking about emissions impacts on this slide. So we have, again, the fuel substitution and fuel switching lines here, present emissions savings per unit, and then times the total number of units to get the program impact. So I'll start with the fuel substitution, 0.91 tons of CO2 reduced per year. So this is both including the estimates of the on-site combustion reduction, and then any source emissions increase, say, from the added electric load. So almost a ton per dwelling unit of CO2 reduced, over 2 pounds of poisonous carbon monoxide emissions per dwelling unit reduced. That's well over the federal limit for any dwelling unit. And nearly 0.9 pounds of NOx, which are a criteria pollutant and health irritant. So those are substantial, I think, at the dwelling unit level. And then you can see, based on the number of units that are treated, the program has significant annual emissions reductions impacts. Looking at the fuel switching, we see really high CO2. Again, that's probably impacted by the addition of PV, reducing that. Not as high a carbon monoxide. So when we did the flue gas sampling, we measured much lower CO for the propane equipment than we did, say, in the case of the fuel substitution sample, but much higher NOx on the per unit basis, 2.8 pounds of NOx reduced annually per dwelling unit. So these are significant reductions in all three of these greenhouse gases or criteria pollutants. So hopefully the California Air Board people are happy about this. I certainly am, for the program, happy that we're achieving this result. Okay, I think we can move to the next. Okay, so this slide is talking about source energy savings. So we covered the site energy savings, what you would see at your meter level. And this is talking about taking the energy source all the way back to, what does the power plant need to provide here? So per dwelling unit on the substitution, almost 7,400 kBTUH. Annual energy savings at the dwelling unit, and the fuel switching, again, that includes the addition of PV. So it's quite inflated versus what we would expect to see with just, say, space or water heating fuel switching measure. But overall, including both substitution and fuel switching, the source energy saved per dwelling unit over 9,000 kBTUH. And as a program overall, 2.7 million kBTUH saved at the source. So this is much higher than reported and evaluated PG&E ESA savings overall, or just specifically for multifamily, which is comparable for this program. So definitely exceeded the program's target here for source savings exceeding ESA. And let me think, that is my last slide. Let me just check where maybe I had a question come in. Okay, I'll have Amber take over from here, and I think we'll kind of have some time to circle back on these questions that I had.
Okay, great. Can you guys move ahead to the next slide? Thank you. Hi, everyone. This is Amber Watkins, and I took the lead in the process evaluation for this study. If you want to go ahead with the next slide. So what we're looking at today is a set of interviews that we did with property managers. We did some follow-up phone calls, in-depth interviews to measure their satisfaction with program interaction. We asked them a host of questions and looked at standard performance metrics like satisfaction with the income verification requirements, paperwork and documentation necessary to meet the requirements, any technical assistance that they had received from AEA, the program contractor, rebates, measure offerings, program overall. The program aimed to achieve a satisfaction rating of 80% or better. And so what's presented here on the slide is a 5-point scale looking at their satisfaction where they rated a 4 or 5 on the 5-point scale. So overall, we found the program achieved their goal for 3 of the 6 program elements. The interviews are really representative of all the measures that they installed. So they did heat pump water heaters, heat pump space heaters, as well as the set of building measures, things like lighting, insulation, windows. And so where we saw responses to not have to less than satisfied, often related to the other measures and sort of the burden of going into customers' homes, the frequency in which they had to do that. And then in general, the labor involved in getting the individual paperwork documentation requirements for the individual tenants was rated to be the least satisfied. So some opportunity to streamline that. But generally speaking, when we look specifically at the measures of heat pump, we see a really high satisfaction ratings, and the program overall did very well with the 100% on measure offerings and 90% on program measures overall. Let's proceed to the next slide. So here's just a couple of takeaways in the open-ended comments that the property managers provided as it relates to their experience. We note that the majority property managers had not actually installed heat pump measures before being introduced to these by the program. And so the program level of education was really compelling. The implementer AEA was very responsive and hands-on and just received a ton of praises throughout this process from these respondents. Where we again see challenges are, these strict set of program guidelines as it relates to the very low income requirements. Specifically, a lot of the participants were in Marin County, and of course, there's a high cost of living there. So there is really just a limited scope and opportunity for some of these property managers. They would have liked to see more flexible requirements or flexibility as it relates to higher incomes to get their tenants to qualify. So for some, they were dissatisfied that they couldn't expand the scope to more of their properties. And again, as I alluded to in the other slide, that we do see property managers really quite satisfied with the measure overall as it relates to heat pumps, but less so as it relates to the non-heat pump measures. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So here is just sort of a short list of what were some of the challenges and barriers that the property managers dealt with. Again, as it relates to the additional measures, they had to go in and retrofit those. Some expressed frustration with the added EM&V process that we had to do some of the testing, as well as, again, different contractors, different contractors coming in at different times. So these multiple visits did pose a challenge for some of them, as well as the pre-post occupant surveys. So we were, looking to get feedback from tenants before they had the measure installed and after. And so there was quite a few touch points with the tenants, making it a bit arduous. The other factors that caused challenges and barriers, again, are some of, in cases where they didn't do additional measures, the installation costs were still quite high for these as compared to the gas-fired equipment. And so, again, it's hard to make that case when the gas-fired equipment is so inexpensive. And of course, the final component here is that these heat pumps are, difficult to get installed. So we can jump ahead to the next slide. We have a set of just motivators. These are the win themes in terms of why property managers went ahead with measures that they have never heard or dealt with before, those being that there was quite a bit of education and responsiveness provided by the installation contractor AEA. The incentives were substantial for most of those. They provided up to 80% of the project cost for most property managers. They found they were in a place where their equipment was effectively at the end of its useful life. Some had intentions to go with solar and recognized that they would have low operating costs or no operating costs for those specific measures. And many of them had, sort of these long-term corporate sustainability goals, desire to do the right thing. And then, of course, the benefit that it gives to those tenants as it relates to comfort and safety, and those, and possibly the ability to increase their costs of renting out to tenants because they're giving them a lower cost of operation. So we can move ahead to the next slide. So our surveys included, in addition to speaking with property managers, we also conducted interviews with tenants. D&V prepared the tenant instrument, and then MCE coordinated with their contractors to collect those surveys. We conducted, again, a comprehensive guide to try and capture the pre and post experience with tenants. And what we looked at was an 80% satisfaction for ease of participation. Overall, again, what we're seeing here in this graph is a 4 or 5 point scale. So the two bars on the right for each graph is the 4 and the 5 point. So collectively, we see for energy efficiency upgrades, a satisfaction rating of 75, so near the goal. For the heat pump measure, the program exceeded its goal at 84%. Information about the upgrade was lower at 47%, and then the lift program overall was rated at 82%. And we can go ahead to the next slide. So here we show the non-energy impacts, and then it's again is getting at the pre-post survey. What we wanted to identify was, is the quality of life better for these tenants? And the metrics in which we looked at were their satisfaction in hot weather climate, in cold weather, whether air quality had improved, and the noise of the system. So we see the tenants are more satisfied in the hot weather, and this may be due to the added benefit of air conditioning with the mini split systems. As you can see, the blue bar is an indicator of their status, their conditions in the pre-setting, and then the green bar is the condition after the measure has been installed. And so what you recognize here in this table is that when the weather is too hot, it is really, we've exceeded in getting it just right for tenants. And so they're quite satisfied with that added benefit of the air conditioning. In cases where it was too hot or occasionally too hot in the precondition, that fell significantly from 43 to 10% and 32 to 13%. Moving to the top right graph here, we have air temperature in cold weather. So the program had not achieved as high a satisfaction as it relates to cold weather. We still see tenants are slightly, occasionally too or often too cold. And as it relates to air quality, we see that they are similar, but a slight improvement in the post condition, with a 9% stating excellent before, and then that jumping up to 17%. In the bottom right graph, we have HVAC noise level, and some very similar parallels, but in the post condition, tenants are quite satisfied, and it's increased from 29 to 31% at being quiet, and increased from 16 to 25% being mostly quiet. So these are really just overall indicators that the fuel switching measures, heat pump, water heaters, and space heaters are providing tenants these improved comfort, safety, and improved quality of life. And we can go ahead down to the next slide. So our surveys also included interviews with contractors that were installing the heat pump measures. At the onset of the program, there was a training that was done up in Santa Rosa to help educate contractors. We intercepted some of those contractors that participated in that at the first phase of our evaluation. The latter phase of our evaluation was contractors that were just involved in the installation and did not receive that additional training. We'll go ahead to the next slide. So these following two slides that we're going to show are what are the perceived barriers to installing heat pumps and what are the enablers? There's quite a few barriers that are still problematic and creating challenges for contractors. And you'll see in comparison to the next slide, there's fewer enablers. So there's things that the programs are going to need to work on to get contractors ready to install these measures, providing workforce training to address education, installation. Those are still a strong need in the market. Education as it relates to maintenance and helping customers with operation, and then incentives in general. This program is very generous with the incentives, but there is still quite a high cost for standard market rate installations. And so when we look at the first column there, financial barriers, contractors are calling out that the equipment costs are still quite high. There is insufficient incentives overall to attract customers. The paybacks, they're not receiving enough education to know that there is an energy savings associated with this. And so these are some of the financial barriers that were expressed. When we look at educational barriers, we know that there is actually few contractors that have experience with these technologies. It requires multiple skills, not just being an HVAC contractor will suffice. You may need to have plumbing skills, contracting skill, a contractor, carpentry type skills, and then also electrical if panel upgrades are required. So most contractors are, unfamiliar, unexperienced with these products. They are fairly new to this part of the country. And so they are not highly recommended as the first set of equipment that you would use, especially in a fuel switching environment. We found contractors concerns with, it not being a favorable choice for those property managers because of financial components. And then again, not having enough information to predict how much savings that they would benefit unless they were going to outfit the homes also with PV. So installations that involved a PV was very attractive. In cases where it's not, it's a harder measure to sell. Where we have a lot of challenges are the structural and technology barriers. What this program aimed to achieve is quite significant in an existing building, doing a one-for-one replacement. Where we have a significant renovation or remodel, entire buildings, there is, it's an easier installation, but in cases where it's just these one-offs, a couple of projects at a time, it requires a lot of carpentry to get the products. They're not drop-in ready. They require additional plumbing, electrical upgrades. This program did see, I think it was 2 projects that had very significant remodels, and so the measure was a bit more attractive in those cases. One other interesting finding with the interviews was that contractors stated that they still needed more technical expertise coming from manufacturers as it relates to design guides to help them put these measures in and be effective in the operational components. And then also we see them calling out for availability of the equipment being there is just less of that available to them in the marketplace in terms of it being readily stocked. Another last but important finding is the operational barriers, and people being new to this equipment may not be aware that there is some maintenance that's going to be involved. And so there's an education component that's going to be necessary for both the tenants and the property managers to be aware of, that there is maintenance related to the refrigerant. And that's, we have seen in this study, or rather in other studies, that they can be noisier. Some of the water heating, if not properly installed, they may be slower to respond in water heating heat pump situations than natural gas, and that can be a challenge or frustration to customers when they're not prepared for that. And then this, some other aspects as it relates to the automation, the cycling on and off of refrigerant. So there's a service and maintenance component that is also posed as seen as a barrier to measure adoption. So we will go ahead to our last slide regarding the overall satisfaction with contractors and experience. As I mentioned previously, we looked at what were some of the barriers and what are some of the enablers to heat pump adoption. You'll see that this list is quite a bit less so than, so that really the bigger picture is there we still see a lot of barriers for contractors. Some of the enablers or benefits is that people do recognize that we have a carbon problem, and companies are pursuing to be green and lowering their carbon footprints. So it's helping them achieve their sustainability goals. They recognize the benefits to tenants as it relates to improved quality of life, comfort, air quality, as well as safety. And then in instances where there is also some enablers are when coupled with the PV system, in cases, we do see some cases where they are aware that there is a lower bill savings, but not all contractors are aware of that. And again, in major renovation or new construction, removing gas altogether from the infrastructure is a possible savings for these developers. And then lastly, in cases where there's these incentives like the ones that MCE and other utilities have been providing. So these are just a few of the enablers and some of the challenges that contractors went through. And I will turn this over to, let's see here. We have a set of conclusions and recommendations next. Do we have any questions in our chat?
I can continue.
I see quite a few. Let's see, do we want to take those now?
Perhaps, Grace, how are we doing on time? We scheduled until 12:30?
Yes, we did. I mean, I think I still would like for us to keep moving forward and do questions at the end, but if we could speed up a little bit so we can get to the questions. So hopefully we can finish a little bit earlier, but yeah, just in case we have until 12:30.
That sounds good. We have just 2 more slides, so if we could move on to the next slide. And one more, please. Right, so the recommendations, the conclusions and recommendations for the program, this was a pilot, and the evaluation was being conducted as the program was getting off the ground. It's being developed and implemented simultaneously. So that's the context for this first recommendation. That the program should improve record-keeping requirements related to program tracking. Through the course of this evaluation, the evaluation team, D&D, we identified some inconsistencies in the program tracking data, and that caused the implementer to rectify and reissue. Accessing the consumption data required a few iterations, and we had partial resolution on those. We identified some gaps in the occupant survey data, which had to be appended on discovery. And as I noted earlier, this is sort of an industry characteristic. Contractor invoices do not include the detail. And so to the extent possible, requiring or prescribing a form where there's elements that are broken down clearly would improve the usability of the data therein. So yeah, hidden or soft costs such as panel upgrades, those, if possible, should be a requirement to be broken down. So, one more recommendation was to maintain sort of a comprehensive central database that includes granular data associated with each project site, unique identifiers, building classification, and so on. Just makes it more evaluable. Incentives provided, contractor information, labor costs, survey responses, so that there's a master comprehensive program tracking database. So that's the first recommendation. The second, is the program was successful with several of its desired sort of stated goals, whether it was reaching these hidden communities of low-income tenants outside of designated disadvantaged communities. The program did fall short of its goal of the number of income-eligible households that it desired to serve. So DNV's recommendation is, further experimentation for the program to increase this percentage of eligible customers, perhaps working with community organizations or deploying in sort of non-traditional marketing or enrollment methods, perhaps focusing on or leveraging some of the techniques used by IOUs, such as direct install and other methods would yield fruit. And we did see a question come in on chat related to COVID-19 impacts. So as we make this recommendation, we recognize that we are still in the midst of a unique sort of market conditions. So maybe, virtual assistants that coach tenants and property managers, and not for heat pumps and heat pump water heaters, but do-it-yourself measure installation, might be necessary. And finally, the recommendation to continue to study these impacts, because while savings goals were met, they were highly variable. This is common because there are a limited number of cases available. A pilot by design, you're doing it on a smaller scale. And so there's greater variability. And because of this variability in project scope, the savings variability might remain high even after additional M&V. So there might be more stable per unit energy savings that may emerge after more of these projects are completed, specifically for mini split heat pumps and central heat pump water heaters. We also, next slide, please. So we also had a few additional recommendations that we provided to NCE. Overall, the program did achieve good tenant satisfaction. There was property manager satisfaction, but there were a few points of improvement that opportunities for improvement that our research indicated. And a recommendation that we provided was that NCE develop a customer journey map for the LIFT program that summarizes roles, responsibilities, and touch points for all actors. Consolidate as far as possible the program process to reduce burden on the recipient of these services, the transaction burden, especially in cases where upgrades involve multiple measure installations. Quantifying non-energy benefits. We had early indications from this pilot that there is some evidence of that, at least the customers perceive there to be some non-energy benefits. So emphasizing the value of these, in addition to energy savings, for the decision makers at the property, contractors, owners, managers, and tenants, will go a long way in persuading these upgrades. And MCE for this lift pilot started out by recognizing that leveraging funding from multiple sources rather than siloed sort of pots of funding, there are benefits to that. So our recommendation is to continue to leverage these funding sources. There are other programs such as TEC and SGIP. So stacking these incentives to deliver comprehensive upgrades for maximum benefit would be recommended. And there's also other sort of low interest financing for green projects that can be explored. And the program technologies covered, there are other synergistic measure offerings, say solar PV, EV chargers, battery storage, or electric appliances like heat pump, dryers, and cooktops. So these expanding sort of the scope in terms of the program technologies that are synergistic is a recommendation. And Amber touched upon the sort of external or corollary cost of a panel upgrade. There are several low amperage technologies that are still being explored. So considering those to reduce program and end user cost for panel upgrades is something that could be considered, and a parallel effort to educate contractors, because these don't have high market penetration yet. That is something that can be done. And again, a recommendation to expand the market for lift. Amber touched upon this, specifically because this program was targeted in areas where this is naturally occurring affordable housing in the very affluent, say, Marin County. What flexibility there may be to have very local requirements that could be adjusted to expand those who may be and admit those who may be eligible. This is yet another recommendation. And then continuing to train and educate the workforce and developing partnerships with contractors and equipment manufacturers so that property managers are served by an informed supply chain resource would be our final recommendation. And that concludes our presentation of the MCE lift pilot evaluation. We are ready to discuss any questions you may have, address any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Gomati. It seems like we have a couple of questions on the chat from previous. Let me go back.
So I think I saw a question from Charles about, did we look into double dipping? And Charles, the answer to that is we did not. Sorry, folks, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I got a chat saying that I wasn't audible. Okay, glad to hear that. So yeah, Charles, we did not look at that. The evaluation did not investigate whether there was double dipping. And I'm trying to scroll here and see what other questions we have.
So this is Cameron. I can maybe address some of the questions about existing air conditioning.
Thank you, Cameron.
Great.
Yeah, so I know one of the larger properties that participated in fuel substitution measure, they had existing gravity wall furnaces and window AC units. Both were quite old. So we're not totally sure the level of functionality, if they were still operating at an acceptable performance, but those projects certainly had existing air conditioning in place. that project or that property, it's more than one project, did undergo a pretty significant retrofit. There are other, I think, projects and at least one sample point for the HVAC fuel substitution where there was only an existing small capacity natural gas furnace. And so the program was actually adding cooling in that instance where there wasn't any, permanently installed existing cooling, which is to say perhaps people had portable AC plug-in, that sort of thing. But that certainly, that example